Ask a group of 100 voice actors what genre they dream about doing, and I'm going to guess that 80 out of 100 are going to say animation. We grew up watching cartoons, so really it's no surprise, not to mention the coolness and legacy factor of having your kids being able to watch your characters on TV one day. But how do we get the work? Do we need to be in LA to get the work? Is animation a realistic genre for most voice actors? These are all things that I believe that my guest today will help us answer. Her credits are impressively long and vast, and she's built them up across many genres, including animation, gaming, and toys. In addition to being a successful voice actor, she's also a founder of the GVAA, where she continues to assist voice actors through coaching. Welcome to the show, Cristina Milizia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Marc.
So, according to your LinkedIn profile, as near as I can tell, you were getting on the bus after kindergarten and heading straight to the studio to start recording. Is that a relatively accurate?
It kind of is, actually. Yeah, I started very young. I was like 8. I was about 8 or 9. And both my parents are performers.
Okay.
They were very much like the starving artists. So I grew up, and we were, again, it was starving artists. So there was not a lot of money. And so they really couldn't afford childcare all that much. So I was taken to all of the gigs. And, by the time I was 2, they were just like, here, kid, they just put me up on stage with them. They're like, just shake this maraca, So I'm up there, I'm like 2, just shaking the maraca. So it was just like, that was my life from the beginning, was just like, 3-part harmony was a game. There was,
Wow.
They were just like, there was instruments everywhere. And if I showed any interest, they'd get all excited and they were like, oh, so I know how to play piano. I know how to play flute. I can play some percussion. I can, there's just, cause it was just all around. So I grew up in a performing family, and my mother decided that she wanted to try to get into voiceover to try to supplement the income. And she was able to get an agent, and she's bilingual. Both my father's from Peru, my mom's from Mexico, and she's perfectly bilingual, English, Spanish. So she got an agent, and she started going on auditions. And one day I was just going with her, and I was in the waiting room. And they came out and they said, oh, actually, we were looking for a kid for one of these roles. Does your daughter want to try? And so I went in and I booked the job, and I had never done it before. And that the casting director on that project was Ned Lott, who went on to be the casting director for Disney character voices and Miyazaki.
So no minor connection to have in your network when you're 8 years old, right? Like.
And I recorded something as recently as, just like 6 months ago or a year ago with Ned, and we're still in contact. And we get a real kick out of getting to be together so many years later. And I thank him for my career, because it was because of him that, this really all began. And there were a few other people too, but my mother also recorded several children's albums for music for kids. And she would bring in like a chorus of kids to the recording studio to record. And of course I was there too. So we'd all be singing whatever the kid's song was. And I guess various engineers would point to my parents and say, who is that? And they were like, oh, that's our daughter. And they said, oh, does she want to try some other stuff? And
Nice.
So that's how that happened. And it was really interesting because I actually had a very heavy lisp when I was little. Like, it was quite significant.
Okay.
But when you're really little, it's not, it's just cute. It's not it's not a barrier to your career. So I just want to say, for everyone who feels like, oh no, I can't ever do anything because I have a speech impediment. I had a speech impediment, a quite serious one. And, hard work and dedication, and you can, it's not necessarily a barrier.
Well, we'll talk about that. Did you see a speech therapist, or was it just doing it every day, or like, was there anything in particular that helped you to overcome that particular struggle?
Actually, I started getting teased.
I don't want to get teased anymore.
Someone called me. I was like, I think it was 11 or 12, and I went to a new school, and they started calling me Sylvester. They're like, hi, Sylvester. And I was like, what? I was like, I didn't even know I had a lisp. I had no clue. I was so devastated.
How cool is it to look back now and be like, go to your high school reunion now and be like, yeah, look at what I did now, right? Like,
Well,
So,
and it was funny because like I had already done voiceover for many years at that point, and I was like, no one told me that there was an issue. That's when I started trying to work on it, and then when I went into commercial work in my 20s, I had to really clean it up. And so I did actually work with a dialect coach, and then
okay.
later, even now, I work on it a little bit with my speech pathologist.
Okay.
So and actually there's also an aspect of that. I'm bilingual, so I speak English and Spanish. I grew up speaking both languages, and the S in Spanish is stronger than in English. And so part of it is also the fact that the pronunciation in Spanish it just has a stronger sound with S. So
Sure.
part of it was also a bilingual thing. So anyway, that was just kind of a random tangent, but
So talk about when you're doing all this stuff when you're a kid, you're going into these auditions with your mom. Is this in LA?
No, we were in the Bay Area.
Okay.
So I grew up in Oakland, California. And so this was all in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area region. And, you know, the I really only did, I did that first audition. And after that, I didn't audition. They would just call me for work. And this was, I mean, again, this was the time before really the internet
Yeah.
explosion
Yeah.
of everything. And so um, I, I'd grown up performing, so I was not shy at all. They're like, be a monkey. And I'm like, sure, I'll be a monkey. Because it was just like, I had grown up just
Yep.
doing whatever.
Don't know anything different, right?
Right. It was very natural for me to just perform and be silly and be big. And I sing. That was a valuable skill set. And I'm bilingual. I speak English and Spanish. And so it was just, I was like a little unicorn because I wasn't shy. They didn't have to get much out. It wasn't a lot of work to get it out of me. And I had these extra skill sets. And because of that, like word got around and then people would just call me. And so I was actually very spoiled because I never auditioned for anything until I got to like in my 20s and I got my first agent. And I was like, oh my God, auditioning is really hard.
I don't want to do this. I like the way that it was before.
I was like, this is really hard. And then I had to learn audition technique, and that was a whole other thing. But I really grew up in a kind of a bubble. I had no idea that, I thought it was a fun way to miss school.
I mean, it was.
It was. It was an
Yeah.
excellent way to miss school, and that we'd go get ice cream with my $20 my mom would give me from the job, and that was it. I didn't really think anything of it until I got to college, and I went across the country, so I didn't have any voiceover clients there, and I had to get like a normal job, and I was working at like Starbucks and like Jamba Jukes, and I was like, this is not very fun.
I would much rather be in the studio.
But people are mean in customer service. They are not kind. And I was like, what am I doing?
What were some of those early jobs then? Like, are we talking like local commercial type stuff, or are we talking like broadcast animation? Like, what were some of those early things that you had the good fortune of walking into?
First stuff I did, everything I did was toys.
Okay.
So toys and games. And really toys during that time, this was really kind of before I don't know what word to describe it, but sort of a technological revolution. I mean, this was before cell phones. And so, toys and electronic toys were very cool. That was the thing.
Yep.
And so there were a lot of toys that talked. And so, all I would do is just all this stuff where it's like, let's play. Great job. You did it. It's all that,
Yep.
Can you find the red square? It's just very, so I did a lot of little bears that talked. I did a lot of like, singing toys, just toys. That was pretty much it. And then there are like toys that are like more like games for like preschoolers and like,
Yep.
depending on the age group. And so all of that kind of material, early education stuff for kids was really what I did.
I had somebody that I was coaching 2 years ago who was interested in getting into the toy space, and they were trying to figure out where to start. And that was right at the time that my baby was born, and all of the toys talked and sang and whatever. And so I'm literally taking pictures of the tags of the manufacturers and sending them off and saying, find somebody on LinkedIn that works at this place. Find somebody, like, all these toys talk. They all sing. They all make noise. Like, somebody's got to be recording this stuff. And she reached out to some people and actually did ultimately end up landing a job that way. So it's nice to know that opportunity is still out there a little bit. So, talk a little bit about, let's get a little bit more into the toy credits, because I know you've done Mattel, Fisher-Price, Hasbro, Leapfrog,
All of the
all the
above.
names,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So you started doing these when you were 8, 9, 10 years old or whatever, you're going to the studio with your mom, but you
Right.
continued to do these throughout, or are you still doing, where are you at with toys now?
So I did toys, I mean, and toys was still the bulk of my income. So it was, 8 years old through about um, age 30, I would
Wow.
say. So that it was literally all toys and games. And then I expanded into video games in my 20s and a little bit into commercial work. But
Okay.
toys was still the bulk of my work. In the Bay Area, right where I was from, is Leapfrog. Leapfrog
Okay.
is in Oakland. And so there's a ton of toy work because of Leapfrog being
Yep.
there. There was another company there called Creativity, and I actually ended up working at Creativity as their talent coordinator, and I did their casting and voice directing as well as being an in-house voice talent for them. That was actually the coolest thing ever because I used to work with them, and then they offered me a job, and basically they paid me to be a salaried voice actor.
Okay.
So they paid me a flat fee per week, and I would record as much as they wanted me to record for everything that came in. And so I got to audition for everything, things I would have
Okay.
never seen,
Right.
if I had been getting it from an agent. So that was one of the best experiences of learning, all just playing with my range, just doing things that, just would be not typically sent to me. But anyway, sorry, Creativity, where I worked, they did music and sound production for toys. That was their specialty. And so that's really how I got exposed to so many different clients in the toy world, because Creativity would produce music, sound, and even game design and invention ideas to Hasbro, to Mattel, to Leapfrog, to MGA, to Playhut, to Play Along Toys. The list goes on and on, Fisher Price. So, and that was actually how uh, there's there's basically companies like that will present ideas to these major toy companies. They'll present their inventions in these invention meetings, and Mattel will be like, "Oh, we love it. We'll buy it," and then
Okay.
they go and they produce it. And there's voiceover that has to go into those invention products. It's like the pitch work, basically.
Yep.
And so that was one of the main things I did, was basically I just did demo vocals for invention products, or I would do demo vocals for like Dora the Explorer. Like I would do like all of the stuff, and then they'd have the real talent come in. Like I'd be her guide vocal
Okay.
kind of thing. So I would go through all the revisions of the song, and then when they finally had the song done, then they'd hire the final talent to come in. So this was, while I'm only doing demo vocals, it was tremendous training for animation, because
Sure.
you're having to match the quality, you have to try to get close to the quality of these huge animation, characters. And so again, it was a fantastic exercise in training for animation later. And so that animation was a very natural transition for me. Because the style is very similar. Toys are very big, very exaggerated, and then having to do so much sound alike work for these big animation characters. So that's how that
So
happened.
with the toys, I mean, in the early days, obviously you said this is before everybody's doing things on the internet. So you're in the studio, they get to know you. My guess is once they get to know you and know how you work, you're a natural call because they don't have to worry about what's this experience going to be like, how's the session going to go, whatever. So I'm sure there's a certain amount of work that comes from that. Then you said you got on with a company who brought you in house to do a lot of this stuff. Is toy work something that where else does it come from? Does it, like, I've never seen a toy audition, I don't think, through an agent. Does it come through agents? And is it something that you would go and find on your own? Is it an online casting thing? Like, if somebody was looking for that, is it really just going directly to the companies?
It can be.
Okay.
I think one of the best ways is actually approaching these production companies that create music and sound for the toys, companies like Creativity. Again, you can approach companies directly. That is an option. The toy world, I have seen auditions for toys through agencies, absolutely, especially when Mattel and Fisher Price and Hasbro were doing more projects. But the world of toy voiceover has very slowly, well, actually not slowly, but quite surely gone to non-union, and it was primarily non-union even 15, 20 years ago still. It really, really shifted over. There was already, not that many union projects. And that trend has unfortunately continued very much. And the biggest companies still were doing union, and then even they switched over for the most part. But yes, I have seen auditions come through agents, but I do think a lot of this work is really just, if you're passionate about it, is finding these production companies, finding these rosters that provide that are again maybe near a toy center like Leapfrog, Hasbro in New York, all of the above, and it's really doing your own research in that aspect would do it. But getting an agent that is near, so Stars, the agency, they get a bunch of Leapfrogs auditions,
Okay.
So again, if you get an agent that's near the toy, producer, that's also another way that you can. But toys really went through a huge shift in the industry when cell phones came out, because suddenly kids didn't want electronic toys, they wanted cell phones. And so the toy world went through a really difficult time, and a lot of companies went under. And so many companies were really struggling to find a way to continue forward. And a trend you'll notice now is that almost all the toy companies that have survived have branched out into animation. Now they create animation to sell the toys. So Bratz has its own animation show now.
Right.
Barbie they did animation.
Yep.
Winx, all of these toy companies, they realized that they had to create animation in order to sell the toys the same way. And so that was what the toy companies did to really to come through that difficult period, and then expanding into things like apps and computer programs and things of that nature.
I was going to say, I would think that apps is probably one of the areas, and I say with a 2.5-year-old running around the house, who sometimes I think her comprehension of the English language is better than mine, and I think it's because she does spend a little bit of time playing some of these games on the iPad or whatever, and every one of them talks to her. And it's funny, I one of the apps that she plays with the most, I coach the voice actor who does the voice for it, and so I get to tell her all the time about how excited Kaylee is when she hears her voice or whatever. But it seems like that would be a natural area if you've done toys or want to do toys. The app space, the children's learning app space, would be another one of those places I'm guessing you want to explore a little bit, right?
Yeah, and actually most of my work that was toy work shifted over into the app world.
Yeah.
And so I started doing lots of little apps for different companies, and it's all like ooh, can you find the right hat?
Yep.
That looks beautiful. Great
Yep.
job. Wait a minute. And it's all and you're guiding them through them drawing or matching things.
Yep.
So I still do some of that. That's one of and those companies are all over the place. And those are definitely companies you could reach out directly to and try to work with. David Rosenthal, he worked for a company for a long time, and he just did all the casting for the app. So, depending on, different casting directors will help. There's probably work on pay to plays too, to be honest. Because again, toys and apps do tend to be lower budget. They're not high paying work.
Sure.
But they are fun. And I do honestly think they are tremendous training for animation, if that is a passion of yours as well.
So I wanted to go back a minute I want to talk about relationships, because you mentioned meeting you said Ned Lott.
Yeah.
When you were like 8 or 9 or something, and still continuing to have a relationship with him to this day. Talk about the importance of those relationships, because I think that's one of the things sometimes I think in voiceover, we get very transactional, right? It's a client who sends us a script, we record it, we send an invoice, move on to the next transaction or whatever. But it sounds like relationship is a pretty big part of how you've built your career. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's probably the hugest part of how I work. And I think a lot of that just has to do with, everyone has their own sort of personality traits and your own, things that are important to you psychologically for whatever reason. But for me, relationships are everything. Friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships. And I love people. Like, I love people. I love being with people. I think they're fascinating. I just feel energized. And when I get to connect with someone on a really deep, authentic level and share our lives and in whatever capacity that happens, whether, I'm coaching them or they're coaching me or, we're just friends over whatever or colleagues or if it's a director, like I live for those interactions. It's what makes the work really, really special to me because I feel like everybody does their best work more when you're all comfortable and when there's these deeper connections and because there's also a level of honesty and transparent where you're just being yourself that's
Yep.
more real and then everyone's more comfortable and then you can be more real about stuff that's going on in your life but yeah, so it's something that's hugely personal to me, just because of just the kind of who I am, and a bit to do actually with how I grew up. I grew up very isolated, very, very isolated, and my parents split when I was 14, and we had no family. I had no family at all, like no grandparents, no
Wow.
cousins, nothing. We were completely isolated. So I had no support structure. And so I just grew up like feeling very alone all the time. And so when I, got out into the world and when I, the older I got, the more I realized I could make more of these important connections. And so it's just a huge priority in my life. And so because of what I experienced when I was little. So that's why it's always been a priority for me. And I guess
It
that's
makes
done well for business, I guess.
I
But not on
well,
purpose. It's just
no, but it makes a big difference, right? And I mean, I love the fact that I've got clients that I've been working with for 10 or 12 or 15 years or whatever. And, we talk to each other about stuff outside of voiceover. And it's nice to have that so that it's not just a transactional business thing. So in your 20s, you go to LA. Is that when animation starts? When does that transition take place?
I had been doing toys for a very long time and video games and just games, toys, and a little commercial work here and there. And basically, long story short, I had a terrible accident when I was 25. But a just devastating accident where it was just like it just destroyed like me physically. And nobody could figure out several aspects of what had happened, and I was just like seeing doctor after doctor, and I was struggling to hold down work outside of voiceover I could still do because it didn't require the physical,
Sure.
my body, and or like standing at a counter or having to do any like that, but um you know I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to just do voiceover full time because I can't use my, I
Yep.
literally can't hold down some of these other jobs that are more physical. Um, and I couldn't even type. Like I had injured my
Wow.
arm so badly that I couldn't type for more than 15 minutes before my whole arm would freeze up. I had a spinal injury and I tore my rotator cuff and a lot of nerve damage in this area. So I couldn't even do like a sitting job that was administrative. I had no options. And I had been doing voiceover part time for my entire life. And I was like, I'm gonna have to go full time or something because I can't, I can't do anything else. Like this is, you know, and gloriously, the light shone from above, and Mattel heard me on a toy invention product in an invention meeting for a baby doll product, and the casting director for all of Mattel was like, "Who is that?" And the invention company said, oh, it's this person, and they tracked me down to San Francisco, and they said they had me do a number of auditions, and then they hired me for like $12,000 worth of work.
Wow.
And this was in 2000 and let's see, yeah, this was in 2010, I think,
Okay.
2010, 11, and they were like, we're going to fly you down, and we're going to have you record a bunch of dolls for us, and it'll be about $12,000. How does that sound to you? And I was like, oh my God. At the time,
At the time, like, yes,
I
please.
was like, oh my God, I was living in such a desperate situation. It was like
Wow.
I was really, really struggling. Like it was terrible. It was a terrible time. And so it just was like, it was such a gift. And I was like, okay, I need to move to LA because I need to be near Mattel. I've been doing toys forever. Mattel and I are meant to be. So I was
Yes.
like, okay. And then, I realized also at the same time that I had been doing toys for so long and even though I enjoyed toys, the income with animation was more, it was union,
Yep.
And I also realized that given the physical issues that I was having, that I needed to change my business plan because I couldn't keep doing these small gig after gig things because I had honestly really serious health problems that I needed
Yep.
to take care of. I needed insurance. I needed, and this was before the Affordable Care Act. So I literally couldn't get insurance. Companies kept turning me down. And so I was like, I have to transition into something that is going to be more sustainable for me to have a life. And I had dreamed of animation the way everybody does, where it just seems so far away. It's like that seems not possible, but when this thing happened with Mattel, I just really was like, you know what? I'm just gonna move to LA and we'll just see what happens. And I was like, I made a New Year's resolution. I wrote down, I was like, if I could do anything, what would it be? And I said, I want to record for Cartoon Network, Disney, and Nickelodeon. That was my goal. I was like, that's my big goal. And so I used my $12,000 and I moved to LA and I recorded for Mattel. And then I emptied my 401k that I had put together after working for 6 years at the production company. I think I had like $44,000 in there. And I emptied it because I was in such terrible shape health-wise that I was like, Dad, there's no point in a 401k if I don't get to the 401k. And to let you know how dire it was, like I was 86 pounds and my hair was falling out. It was really severe. I was really, really ill. It was, turns out that I have Graves' disease. And it was also, I had hyperthyroidism that got triggered by the accident because of the stress. So there was all these things going on, but I couldn't even get health insurance enough to figure out what was wrong with me. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to, whatever happens, I'm going to this is the money I have that, I'm going to empty the 401k. I'm going to use the $12,000 and whatever happens, let's just go for it. And that's what I did. And I got really lucky. I got an LA agent, which was amazing. And then, I wasn't booking a ton in animation yet. I booked like, maybe 2 things. But then my agent, I was with TGMD Talent originally. And my agent went over to AVO Talent and I went with him. And, we had an honest conversation and he said, Christina, he said, I'm going to be honest, at TGMD Talent, you weren't making me any money. He said, yes, again, honest conversation. He said, but I felt like it was because you weren't getting the animation shots that you deserved. And so he said, I feel at AVO Talent, Sandy is going to be amazing for you. She has the connections. She has all of those relationships. And I think that's going to change for you at AVO Talent. And it did.
Was there anything else specifically that you were doing to prepare yourself for this animation? Or was it just the fact that you started when you were 8, you were the way that you were as a kid, not afraid, willing to try anything, grew up in the studios, doing all these toys? Was the toys the training? Or were there other steps that you took along the way?
I think the toy work was a huge part of the training. Just in terms of what I would say, bigness, willing to be very big, willing to do really extreme, really silly, really wild stuff. When you're asked to sing a song in pig or chicken, it's already that you've already crossed that barrier of absurdity.
Right. Why hold it back at that point?
Right. So I'd already been asked to do things like that, so animation is very big. It's very silly. Obviously there are more grounded, realistic styles as well now, but,
Sure.
But, for more typical animation, like it's huge. And that's, that's one of the biggest things when I do coach people too, is that they don't realize how big it is, and how dynamic it is, and how much all of those variations in pitch and volume and speed make such a difference in the performance. And so I think the bigness of toys and the fact that I had the opportunity to, for 6 years, audition for everything from baby voices to old ladies and animals and creatures. And, that gave me the range to not be afraid to try all this weird stuff. I think that was the foundation. And then all of my musical training growing up with two performing parents. So I think that was the foundation. That being said, I really had to work on the acting. That was the thing that I was not up to par with, and that I really had to put in the work. And so
the voices alone are not enough, right?
Right. Yep. And even, as recent as, like 2 or 3 years ago, I did some coaching with someone, and they're like, you are a vocal gymnast. You know how to do all kinds of crazy stuff with your voice. Now we need to work more on like your turns, the dynamics of it, finding the comedy, all of these, other aspects of it. So no, I absolutely had to put in the work in terms of the acting side of it, because so you have to have all those elements. But the acting is what brings it home. The toys, they're not deep. It's not deep work.
Right.
I struggled originally. Toys, they're like very short lines, so all of a sudden I had a chunk of text, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this big chunk of text. Like I knew how to do like one line at a time.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was a transition. But and during all this time, I started GVAA. And it was so funny because I started it as like something that I felt was really important because I knew so many good coaches, and I wanted to connect them to people to be able to have access to quality voiceover coaching. But in some ways, even though what I originally set out to do was to help other people, I think it helped me inadvertently, which I didn't, because I owned the company, so I got to watch all the classes.
Yep.
This is mine. So I was like,
yep.
Hey, and so I started watching, and I started learning, and I made it a point to coach with every single coach we had on the roster. So I could, if people came to me and wanted to know what direction to be pointed at, I could say very specifically, this person is great at this. And so I threw myself into getting all this coaching because I wanted to help other people, but it ended up helping me a lot more than I realized it was going to. And it's also realizing, I was like, wow, I have still a lot to learn too in this area. And it was very humbling, but that was really like, again, I had a good foundation, and then it was just, I just took off. As soon as I had the information I needed, I was just like, and you never stop learning. Like I'm still learning, but
wow. If you're smart, you never stop, right? I mean, the industry's constantly evolving, the styles, what people are looking for. So for the voice actor who is not growing up in that environment with the toys and having that as their training ground, is it acting classes? Is it improv? Is it working with a specific coach? Like what is the path that person takes to try to get to this end animation goal that so many voice actors have?
Actually, I think one of the best ways to train, aside from, musical theater and plays, which you can do at there's a lot of community college stuff or small productions for kids where you can get involved, and it's not a costly thing at all. So yeah, just getting into different acting opportunities where you get used to being on stage, you get used to taking direction, you get used to performing on the spot and not getting stressed out. And I'm also a huge believer in musical vocal training if you can. Reason being, even if you're not a singer, learning how to use your voice to its full potential, learning how to change your vocal resonance, learning how to change the tone and the timbre of it, learning all these tiny things like, there's so much in vocal technique. And you'll notice some of the greatest animation voice actors are singers. Tara Strong, Greg Griffin, they're great singers, and they know how to use their instrument on such a high level. And I know people get intimidated by that because they're like, I'm not a singer. And I'm like, it's okay. Even if you're not a singer, there's still techniques that you can learn from a singing teacher for just how to control your sound. Like, again, if you want to sound bigger or older, like just understanding that, like, if you just open up the back of your throat and you lift up your soft palate and you drop your tongue, all of a sudden it's a completely different sound.
Wow.
Right?
That's crazy. Yeah.
And that is literally just a technical thing. All I did was drop the back of my tongue. I lifted my soft palate, and I feel like I'm yawning the entire time.
Wow. That's crazy.
And so but you don't learn though. So learning, versus like, if I'm going to be really forward, if I'm going to put it behind my nose, all of a sudden it sounds younger, and I didn't even change my pitch. But I didn't make it nasal like Fran Drescher. I didn't go that far, I didn't go that far, but I just put it right there, like right in the front. And all of a sudden it sounds really bright.
part of learning this too is learning how to do it the right way so that you protect your instrument for the long term, right? If you're not doing it all the right way, I'm guessing you could potentially do some damage, right?
Well, right, and that is the advantage of doing the vocal training, because something I also do regularly, and I bring it into my coaching work now to help people not hurt themselves, and to get the most out of their vocal range is I've actually been taking speech pathology for the past 5 years.
Okay.
I take regular speech pathology, and because if I'm getting really tired doing a voice, I want to know why. And usually they're able to help me. They're like, oh, okay, put the placement here, try this instead. We're going to change this. You have a lot of jaw tension. Let's separate, your jaw and your tongue have fused basically. So let's separate the two. And so there's so much that you can get out of a great speech pathologist and a great singing instructor for learning how to use your range in a healthy way. And so, that's all stuff that I bring in when I work with people. But it's so again, you don't have to be a singer. It just teaches you how to use what you have.
It's important that people understand this stuff, right? Because it's so many people come in and be like, well, I can do all these characters, or I can do these different voices or whatever. And that's a building block, right? It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the puzzle on the whole. So I'm guessing that a lot of this top tier animation stuff is coming through agents. So 2-part question. Part 1, who are some of the agents or agencies that voice actors should be keeping an eye on, potentially for this kind of work? And, do you have any tips for what they could potentially do to be getting on the radar?
That's a really great question. And I hope I don't forget any agents. Like, I'm going to I hope I don't forget anybody really vital. There are some of the agents that get most of these auditions that have the relationships. The ones that I can think of off the top of my head, the big players, AVO Talent, Sandy has my agent. She has an amazing relationship with Disney, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon. And that's something a lot of people don't realize about when you get with people just like, I got a really big LA agent. Yeah, but do they have the relationships in the areas that you want to work in? Atlas is an agency that is very well known. Again, they're LA, New York, and they also have a fantastic relationship with those studios. They get a ton of work. They have an amazing roster. SPV Talent is one that I see a lot. And so when I go in also for callbacks, when you can see everybody's name, you have to put the agency too. So these are also the ones that I see, when I go in and I get the callback and I can see. So it'll be SVV, it'll be Atlas, it'll be AVO, it'll be Vox as well. Sometimes Dean Pinero, sometimes Abrams. But I'm trying to think, I hope I'm not missing. Oh, CESD is a big one as well. That's a big one. That's the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I would say if you really want to do animation, definitely, Atlas, CESD, AVO, Vox, SBB are the first ones that come to mind for me. So,
any pro tips for how we get on the radar? I'm assuming we're not just going to start emailing all these people and saying, look at me, listen to my demo. I'm sure there's 1,000 voice actors a day doing that, but are there some smarter ways to go about getting in front of them or getting on the radar?
It's really tough. I've recommended talent to my agent, probably at least 3 or 4 times, and they didn't take anybody I recommended. So just know that having somebody there to refer you doesn't necessarily help you all that much, especially if it's another voice actor. If you're a casting director, that is very different.
Yep.
So just know, asking your voice actor friends to refer you is not necessarily the thing. But if a casting director offers to refer you, oh my goodness, do that. So I was working with a student about a month ago, and we were preparing for a workshop in front of a major casting director. And I was like, we need to work before. Let's work, prepare all the scripts. So we did it. And I was very excited because, he was like, yeah, it went well. And I was like, okay, great. And then I think it was a week later, he called and he was like, they're calling me in for an audition. She called me in. And I was like, yes. So we're super excited. And so, I said, call me right after. Tell me how it goes.
Yep.
And he called me and he said that she said, oh, and if you're looking for, if you need an agent for animation, you can use my name and refer me. And these are the agencies I work with the most. And so now he has a door open. He went to a
Wow.
workshop. So
Yep.
here's the steps. He worked with an animation coach. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I just want to say, if you go to a workshop with a casting director, don't go like, yes, you want to go and learn, but like I would go to that because I want her to know who I am. Do you
Right.
know what I mean? Like, and obviously I still have things to learn, and I'm sure there's things I would learn in that workshop, but don't go to a workshop with a casting director if you're not ready yet. That's
Right.
my personal recommendation.
Never get a second chance to make that first impression, right?
Right. And yeah, maybe you'll see them in a few years later and then you're like way better. But I
Yep.
would say like do all the other workshops first. There's so
Yep.
many with great voice actors or other really excellent coaches. I would say do all of them first. And then when you're like, you know what, I know I'm in a good spot, then go and prepare ahead of time with an animation coach, because again, the person I was working with had attended many workshops but he'd never gotten the call until he worked with me right before. And so do the coaching ahead of time, prepare for those opportunities, because that is a one-time opportunity. They put on these workshops all the time. You can go and you can find them, and that's your chance to shine. And he rocked it, and I was like, heck yeah. But so now he has this casting director referred me to you, and that's something an agent is going to listen to far
Right
more
on.
than your fellow voice actor friend who happens to be repped there. So that's one avenue that you can get in. There's honestly just being amazing. Like that sounds really generic. Be amazing.
There's a lot of competition out there. You've got to have something that makes you stand out, right?
Right. So I'm just going to embarrass a friend of mine right now, Michael Schwalbe. Michael Schwalbe is an amazing voiceover talent. So he is the only person that I knew, like of my friends, that tried to apply to AVO talent who got in. And they were so excited to have him, and he's like was super pumped. And if you go and you listen to his stuff, I mean, it's incredible. Like he does every genre, and he was also a metal singer. So he has a whole like singing stuff with like opera and metal. And then, on top of it, because of all of his metal training, he does creatures, like really stuff that would rip the rest of us up, but he knows how to do it without hurting himself. And so, like it is possible to get an LA agent, even if you don't live in LA, if you are at a certain level, like that is possible. Another talent named Brian Sommer, he also has an LA agent and he lives in the Bay Area. He's also willing to fly at a moment's notice. So that's important too. If they need him in LA, you got to be able to pick up and go. But a lot of stuff he gets to just do in his home studio, and it's because he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. He's one of the best voiceover talents I've ever heard. So if you're at a certain level, it is absolutely not impossible to get into an LA agent, but it is very competitive and it is hard. So
we have to go there now because you just brought it up about, being in LA or not being in LA or being willing to travel or fly at a moment's notice. You did what a lot of people assume is impossible to do. A few years ago, you left LA for upstate New York, but your career has not slowed down at all. And so to a degree, you've debunked the myth that you have to be in LA to have access to this work. How did you pull that off, though? Is it because you'd already been there, proven yourself, had the relationships, or is there shifts that are happening in the industry?
I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I do think the fact that I was in LA for 10 years absolutely matters. So I already had a relationship with Nickelodeon. They already knew my stuff. They already knew my home setup. They, same thing with these casting directors, that I'm working with the same casting directors that I worked with then. Again, trust is already built. They know you. So as long as your home studio is at the level where it needs to be, it's not an issue. And I had talked to my agent and I said, if I move, is this okay? And she said, don't worry about it. Just go. And then I found out I was not the only person who had moved, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot of people did, including, there are many huge voice actors that don't live in LA anymore. I think Darren Norris moved out, I believe. I don't know him super well, so that may have changed. But James Arnold Taylor lives in Tennessee. D. Bradley Baker, his home is mostly in Colorado. He has a home here oh, not here. Sorry, I keep forgetting I'm not in LA anymore. But he has a home in LA as well. But he isn't in LA all the time. There are many voice actors where once you establish yourself and then you leave, those relationships that you cultivated, that the trust has been built. And I do try to come back to LA at least once a year to see people, to have lunches, to,
Yep.
go in person to the studios and see everybody. When
It's
Alex
nurturing
is,
those relationships, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so when Alex is a little older, I'll probably come back even more often. But he's only 3 right now. So, but yeah,
Tough to travel
it's,
with a 3-year-old. I know.
yeah.
I feel you on that one. Okay, so Disney, Nickelodeon, right? These are like the dreams for a lot of people. Obviously, you don't start there. So one of the things that a lot of agents, or at least my understanding is that a lot of agents are looking for, is that you're bookable, right? You've get some credits. Come to me when you've got some credits. So for the voice actor who has that end goal of Disney or Nickelodeon or these major animation studios, where do they look for the credits now that they can get in order to get to that next level?
I actually don't think you necessarily have to have the credits.
Really?
Yep, and I know of a specific person who did it.
Okay.
So there is a wonderful talent named Courtney Lynn. She worked with us at GVAA. Super hard worker, incredible work ethic. Trained with David Rosenthal, Brian Sommer, our team here, and she and I did some coaching stuff more recently, and so we had a chance to chat. And and I also I decided to interview her before I went to One Voice and gave my presentation, because I gave one that about breaking in and standing out in animation, because the way I broke into animation is different from how many
Yep.
people broke in, and so I wanted a variety of stories to bring to my presentation. So Courtney Lynn is a series regular on Nickelodeon's Monster High. She voices the role of Dracula, and she's in every episode.
Okay.
And Courtney Lynn worked hard. She worked very hard, and she worked very hard for years. And she had little bookings, nothing. She never got her big break. That was her big break. That was her big break. And it was out of there was no lots of previous credits. That did not happen. Smaller credits. She came out the door and she worked with David on that audition and she booked it. And after that, she just started flying. Because once you get into that world too, especially once you start getting into ensemble records, you start getting more comfortable. And then you start seeing the level of everyone else. It just makes you step up your game even more, because everything just starts to click. And then you get the direction that you need. And so there's, once you're in there, you just start flying, because then you get the world on a whole
Right.
other level. Before that, it's all audition technique and standing out. And it's so hard. And it's such hard work to just break through. So just know, I really don't feel like you have to have a bunch of credits in order to book that big thing. It's really just a matter of not giving up, putting in the work. And let me just tell you, Courtney Lynn, I don't know if she's gonna watch this and be embarrassed, but there's a level of work ethic that people don't realize how much commitment, how many hours every day. And we're not talking about just to the craft. It's about, learning how to edit, getting your studio where it needs to be.
Yep.
She was telling me about something happened early on where the company really loved her. And she was all excited because they reached out to her. They wanted her to do this thing. And then the studio wasn't where it needed to be. And she was like, never happening to me again. And she just worked super, super hard to make sure to learn everything there was to know. And so, it really is just tenacity and work ethic and not giving up. And if you spend long enough doing it and you are going to the right coaches, you're getting the right information, you're not just spinning your wheels, then, it can happen. And she does have a very bookable little voice. She's adorable. She's got a great, bright sound, really just a big personality, but she also worked really hard. So yes, you can have stepping up credits, but I don't think it's actually necessarily true. Having a good agent where you're getting the audition and then having good coaches behind you, you can absolutely break through on something big. I think one of my first jobs ever was on Doc McStuffins, and I was terrified.
I have become very familiar with Doc McStuffins in the last year, and I have a 2-year-old who walks around very frequently with her little Doc McStuffins jacket on, and she walks up and says, "Daddy, I have a diagnosis," and she pulls out her little book, and I'm like, yeah, yep, very familiar with Doc McStuffins. Didn't
Yep.
have a clue who Doc was before, but very, very much familiar now.
Yep. No, so that was one of my first, I think that was like my first job or second job ever in animation. So,
Wow.
and I was with TGMD. I wasn't even with AVO Talent then. I was a smaller agency, and it was just, if you're the right voice for the right part, and again, it's just sometimes that magic happens. But I think
Yep.
it's a very patient process in the beginning. But once you get going, then again, people start to get to know you. And then once you get on one show, they're like, oh, we have another role. And it saves them money if someone in their cast already voices a second role because they don't have to pay as much. So then they'll send out roles just to the existing cast sometime because then they don't have to get an outside actor. So, everything just snowballs off of itself. It just keeps going once you're in there. It's just breaking through. I want to mention one other way people break through, because I did talk about it in my One Voice thing now that I'm talking about that. Social media. And I know of 2 voice actors now that they are social media personalities. They are, they do entertainment and they do characters on their social media. They created characters for their social media. One of them is Jenny Lorenzo. She's hysterical. And she produces these amazing videos, and she has a huge following. And, so casting directors approached her and offered her work and auditions because they love the characters on her social media. And I know of another talent who that just happened to as well. And I can't talk about, the show or anything that, that happened. But so that is also a viable option for getting into animation.
You got a worldwide audience at your fingertips for free if you take advantage of it and know what you're doing. So yeah, that's a very valid one too. Social media would be a great place. There's a lot of people that are getting famous because of TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever. Well, Cristina, you've come a long way, obviously, in your career and certainly achieved some incredible heights. But I am curious about one thing. Let's say you have the opportunity to go back 10 or 15 years with the benefit of hindsight. Is there a piece of advice that you would give yourself? Is there something that you would change and do differently?
That's a really good question. I don't know. The journey was what it was, and there's so many things that happened kind of when they needed to happen. I could say that, honestly, I wish I had more guidance earlier in my career.
Right.
I didn't have anyone. I didn't have any coaching, and it's one of the reasons. Yeah, I had no one. I had nothing. And my parents weren't voice actors. My mom started to get into it, but she really didn't do that much. And I did a lot. I didn't have any guidance. So that's something I would have loved to be in the animation world a lot younger. And I think I could have, but I didn't have anyone even telling me that this was a viable thing to do, with my life, or where I needed to be or how to train for it. It was really a kind of meandering journey. And a lot of it was based on, like anything, you fail at something or things are not working and then you make a choice to go somewhere else. And so I think if I had known, in hindsight, I would have sought out more mentors and coaching earlier and guidance. But that being said, I also wasn't committed to doing voiceover for the rest of my life. I didn't know that it was going to be, I had several passions. So I was a professional dancer, which a lot of people don't know. But after my accident, that was not an option. So I wanted to be a dancer for that's what I wanted to do for my early career. But life decided that was not going to happen. But life took me where it needed to go. So yeah, I do wish I'd had more mentorship early, but, I really did find that when I founded GVAA and then accidentally hired a bunch of mentors and then they helped me.
Well, that leads us perfectly into where I wanted to go, which was, you founded GVAA. You talked about how that ended up being an incredible benefit, not only for every voice actor who participated, but for you as well, watching from the sidelines. I know you took a little bit of break from the coaching, but now you're coming back. So Let's talk a little bit about that to wrap it up. I mean, you've given a ton of amazing advice on the animation world, but you also talk about, if I'd had a mentor, if I had somebody guiding me a little bit sooner. And so I know that's something that you can do for other voice actors now through your coaching and drawing from all of your years of experience. So talk a little bit about what you've got to offer from a coaching standpoint.
I think it's why it is probably, that is probably one of the main reasons why I do feel passionate about it, is because I didn't have that access to the information that I needed. And I love helping people because I didn't have the help I needed. And so I took a break for a while. When GVAA first started, everything just exploded, especially when we made the rate guide. And it was so much, and I was so young. And I was, I don't think I was really ready mentally to take on like leading a company in that same way. And I discovered that when I coach, I tend to put other people first all the time. It's just kind of how my brain is. And so when I'm working with people, I would always put myself like last. And so I wasn't focusing on my animation because I was thinking about my students all the time, which is not a bad thing. It's like a good thing in a coach, obviously. But I realized I really wanted to put that time in. So I did. I stopped for about 6 years, just focused on animation. I started coaching again because here in New York, again, I don't have the community of voice actors that I had. And I love, like we discussed before, I love relationships. I love connections, and I love helping. I love helping so much. It's just, and getting to share my passion. And I had so much more to share now because I had 6 years, 7 years of just in the trenches doing it to come and share. And that's been so exciting because sometimes you don't even realize how much you've grown or learned until you're passing it on to someone else and formulating it out loud and trying to describe it. So I am coaching again. I'm not, coaching a ton. But I am accepting students now. And people can find me on the Global Voice Acting Academy site. I do private coaching, and then I do 2 workouts a month for the GVA membership. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's just I think it's about $59 a month, and you get 2 coach workouts. You get a huge range of things. You can check it out on the site, but I do teach twice a month in there, which is a blast, and I love my group. So it's really fun.
Well, we'll put that in the show notes so people can check that out as well if anybody's interested. Well, Cristina, this has been amazing. You got a really powerful story. I love. One of my favorite things that I've been doing lately in talking to voice actors on the podcast and starting to uncover some of these stories is learning all the different ways that people have come at the industry, right? All the different backgrounds, and there's not one path, right? There's not a guaranteed path straight to whatever it is that you're looking for, but people come from different places, different backgrounds, different situations, overcoming different struggles, approaching things different ways. And so I hope that alone is inspiring for people to, some people are going to be like, oh yeah, she had it easy because she grew up in the studios from 8 years old. But I mean, you've had to work hard and you've had to overcome struggle and you've built this thing and you've done the impossible and moved away from LA and kept doing the thing. And so that in and of itself, I think, is an inspiration for a lot of people as well. So I'm really grateful to you for taking the time to come and share a little bit of that and helping some people who are working towards that animation dream.
I wanted to say, again, yes, even though I got my start in LA and I think that helped, I don't think it's impossible to live somewhere else and get an LA agent as long as you're willing to fly if they ask you to. I've seen people do that now. So no, it really isn't a barrier. So that was just the last thing I wanted to mention. But Marc, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you to your guests and your following for wanting to hear my story. It was really fun to come and talk with you today.
Right on. Thank you, Cristina. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.